Landmark rulings by the United States Supreme Court in its latest term, and a proposal from President Biden to have term limits for Supreme Court justices and change the law on presidential immunity. We're discussing whether change is coming or whether this is election year politics. The historic stadium deal between the city and the Jaguars is now done. We're joined by a Jaguars vice president to discuss what comes next. And what about the future of Jacksonville's Northbank and the core of downtown? Lori Boyer of the Downtown Investment Authority joins us to discuss whether it will ever be the vibrant and lively place that has been envisioned for decades. All that on This Week in Jacksonville. Good morning. I'm Rick Mullaney, Executive Director of the Jacksonville University Public Policy Institute, filling in for Kent Justice today. He'll be back again next week. The United States Supreme Court is front and center nationally with its landmark rulings in its latest term and a proposal this past week from President Biden to impose term limits, change the law on presidential immunity, and impose a code of ethics enforceable outside the court. Here to discuss all of this is Jacksonville University College of Law Dean Nick Allard. He is a Rhodes Scholar and a Yale Law School graduate with more than 40 years of experience in law, policy, and higher education. Dean Allard, thank you for being on today's program.
Rick, it's a privilege, and right as we're moving into our new building downtown on Forsyth Street and welcoming our third class of students, hard to believe.
Well, congratulations on all of that, Dean. And I wish we had an hour, but we don't. So I'm going to start off with one of the big questions. This past term of the U.S. Supreme Court was clearly historic. It was extraordinary in the eyes of many, controversial, very controversial. How about highlighting some of the key rulings from the U.S. Supreme Court in its latest term?
Well, Rick, you got that right. The Supreme Court often has terms, years, when it flies under the radar screen. This year, the court seemed to be reaching out and deciding blockbuster cases that what they have in common is overturning longstanding precedents or touching things that really a lot of people care about. So you've got to start off with the presidential immunity case, which found for the first time, some broad immunity for the President of the United States. You've got two abortion cases, one permitting for now at least emergency abortions in Idaho, and the other permitting the use of the pill, the abortion pill, mifepristone, which 60% of American women use. So this is, the court now trying to clarify and deal with the repercussions of Dobbs, which was decided 2 years ago, overturning Roe v. Wade. And then it just goes on and on and on. Agency power is reduced. Sleeping outdoors, if you're a homeless person, is criminalized. Two significant gun cases. One, for the first time, upholding a ban on domestic abusers being able to possess firearms, and then the other is overturning the prohibition on bump stocks. So there's just a lot of cases. We could go on, but they're all significant. And this year, the court seemed to be embracing and seeking attention and reaching out very aggressively.
Certainly very significant. Let's highlight one in particular because it was the subject of President Biden's proposal last week, and that is the immunity case. Mm-hmm. So what did the U.S. Supreme Court hold in that case? And what does that mean for the future of Jack Smith's prosecution in D.C. on conspiracy and obstruction charges? Is it still alive?
Well, that decision bears some close reading and it's going to generate a lot of follow-up litigation. So in terms of having an impact on the pending Trump cases, which is, of course, the immediate concern, there's two other cases that have to be brought into place. One is the Florida case by Judge Cannon in completely dismissing the election interference case and the documents case on the basis that there's no right to have a special prosecutor, that was improperly constituted. Now, there haven't been any judges in a long time that even thought that that was legitimate, but if that's upheld and that turns over, it's good news for Hunter Biden if that's upheld. So that's one case. And the other is that the court one of its big decisions was it restricted the federal obstruction crime, the definition of it, so that it was much narrowed, and that was included as an article of indictment in a lot of the January 6th defendants, but that has a direct effect in whether it applies to Trump's documents case or his election interference case. So there's going to be a lot of follow-up confusion.
So, Dean, let me ask you this. Because of what you just outlined, President Biden this past week says he wants to basically amend the United States Constitution to change what the U.S. Supreme Court did in its immunity holding. So, a two-part question. What would the proposal look like from the president, and does it realistically have a chance of passing in getting a constitutional amendment?
Well, it depends. How about that for a legal answer? But the Biden proposal has three parts. The first part, the biggest part, is to overturn or to reverse the decision in the immunity case. And if that is introduced in Congress, it'll require a 2/3 vote, both houses, and 3/4 of the states to, or legislatures to approve it. Now, that process takes a long time, over many years, if it's successful. It took a long time with the Equal Rights Amendment, for example, and it's just a very, very difficult process. However, this is such a core issue, you know, anything can happen, and I'm getting out of the prediction business in politics. I think it'll have a lot more legs depending on the outcome if the Democrats will manage to run the table and win the House and the Senate and then the White House. That's not really such a safe bet right now to go that way, but I think the chances, are going to be determined in November on how far that proposal goes.
Well, Dean, let me ask you about the second piece of his reform effort, and that is imposing term limits, and like 18-year term limits on the U.S. Supreme Court. Do you think realistically that has a chance? Because that also requires a constitutional amendment. Does that realistically have a chance of passing?
That's a long considered, and about 60% of the people who've commented and 60% of Americans favor term limits. So that has a little more support for it. There's a question about whether that can be done constitutionally or not. And how it might be done, which would be very tricky, because if you have a sitting 9 justices, how are you going to replace them, or do you add to them and then phase in the others and so on? So the devil is in the details of how that proposal works out. It's going to have to be a lot more complicated than it sounds in order to put it into place. But it's something that has a lot of support and sort of makes a lot of sense. People are living a lot longer than they used to. They're around a lot longer, and 18 years of service at a tough job like that is plenty of time to make an impact.
Dean, 30 seconds, real short. I wish we'll have to have you back for another segment, but if you were to highlight maybe one case coming up in the next term, what might you highlight for the U.S. Supreme Court?
What I would highlight to you is I think that they're tapping the brakes and actually slowing down a little bit and reaching out. There are some big cases that are coming up, but I last night looked over the 28 cases that are pending, and I didn't see any of them that really jumped out and smacked me in the face.
Dean, thank you for being with us, and congratulations on this third.
Thank you, Rick.
Third
Thanks
class.
very much.
When we come back, the Jaguars stadium deal is done. So what's next for the franchise, downtown, and the city? That's next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville on Channel 4.
Welcome back, and thanks so much for staying with us. The $1.4 billion City Jaguar Stadium deal is the largest public-private partnership in Jacksonville history. And the Community Benefit Agreement is the largest in NFL history. With the stadium deal finalized and passed by City Council, what does it mean for the future of the franchise, downtown, and the city? Here to discuss this is Harvard College and Harvard Law graduate and Jacksonville's General Counsel and Senior Vice President Mega Perrick. That's a mouthful, Mega.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great to have you on the program.
We appreciate the opportunity.
And also we're very pleased to have you on the board for the Jacksonville University Public Policy Institute.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I've enjoyed that experience, and you are a wonderful ambassador for that program. I feel guilty because I have to follow the dean, and he went to Yale. You are chock full of lawyers today on this show.
Well, Mega, when this deal was over, you and I were talking, and you said how significant this was as you're looking to the future, and that led to this discussion to have you on air. Now that this deal is done, really the largest public-private partnership in the history of our city, and I was fortunate to be around 30 years ago when we did the first one. Look into your crystal ball. What does this mean for the future of the franchise?
Well, I think that it provides significant stability and answers what was probably one of the most difficult questions, which is how do we keep this team in Jacksonville for the next 30 years? And so for us, we have to go actually build it, which will be the challenging part going forward, but we have a great team that we're putting together. But I think that it really answers the difficult question that we kept on hearing, even though you see not just the investments that have been made in the stadium with this project, but since the Khan family purchased the team, both within the stadium and outside of it and in the surrounding areas. There was a real excitement within our office seeing those tower cranes on the Four Seasons site, seeing that come out of the ground and watching all of that progress, which I think there was just an element of doubt. And Shad said it best the day after the stadium deal was approved, which is, he said, never doubt Jacksonville. And I thought that was just a wonderful way to describe what the future looks like.
I think you hit the nail on the head with that answer, in part because I think for the past 3 decades, there's always been an insecurity about the Jaguars leaving. Now you've got another 30 years, and that really is significant. But the other part of this, answering this question about the Jaguars' commitment to this community, over and above the $1.4 billion stadium deal is this potential $300 million community benefit agreement. How about describing that and what you hope it accomplishes?
It was important to us to be able to, I should mention that there's still legislation pending with City Council, so I know that there's active discussions, but it was important to us to be a good steward of the community. We are members of the community, and we want to make sure that we contribute not just through all of the private investment that's happening across the street or that'll go into the stadium, but also just in a more broad base. The strength of the city really helps the strength of the team. There's a symbiotic relationship there, and so it's important to us.
Well, we talked about that piece of it, and you started to get into this in your first answer is, it's one thing to play football games, but also what happens outside the stadium. What do you think this means for the future of downtown, and what is sort of the Jaguars' vision for that future? I
think we have a really incredible footprint with the sports complex there, and just speaking as a resident in this community, right, and not with my team hat on, what I would say is that it's a wonderful experience to be able to go to a football game or a concert, have a beautiful park across the street, be able to go on the river. And we just are hoping to add more activity to longer term. I know that the mayor has said that it's a priority as it relates to the overall area. But the footprint between the ballpark, the arena, Daly's Place, the stadium, there's a lot of activity in that complex that's all fairly close together. And I think that the city's done a great job of helping us sort of focus on, okay, what does the future look like in terms of making this a place where people want to live and work and stay and play, and it's more than just them coming downtown to go to a game.
Well, let's talk about something that's outside the stadium that you alluded to earlier, but is really exciting, and the naysayers said would never happen, which is the Four Seasons Hotel, which is how about describing that? What's happening right now, what the timeline looks like, and what you think it means to the future?
Sure, I think that you mentioned this with the naysayers. I think it shows that where there's people who are willing to partner and be reasonable and fair and come together. The city's been a tremendous partner for us throughout the years, and that absolutely continued through this deal. And I think that it shows when you have a commitment to developing downtown and private investment, it's possible. It really is. It just may take longer or be harder than sometimes people expect it to be, but that's prudent process, and it was a good process to follow. And that's why we tried to be so sort of proactive in terms of doing the community huddles, and I thought that the Jaguars leadership did a really good job of trying to make sure that people felt involved in the process, because we are the city's team.
So when do we think that is done, and what do you think the impact's going to be?
In terms of the impact, I know that we're just expecting not only to attract a completely different sort of level of guests, but I think that it creates this sort of destination point and focal point in downtown that just doesn't really exist. And I'm equally excited, to be honest, about all of the other things that may happen around that area, including like the adoption of Met Park, to really help connect this city's downtown to all of the natural beauty that exists here, and hopefully creates a really sort of healthy environment for people to walk around and enjoy and be able to experience all of the elements in that area.
Let's talk about that for a second. You talked about connecting it and long-term vision here. Lot J may have been ahead of its time, but the long-term vision of residential living, of retail, of mixed use, is that part of the long-term thinking for the sports district?
I think, and look, I will say this, that we don't necessarily need to be the only people that are contributing to development, but I hope that we are anchored there and attract all of those sorts of mixed uses, because I think that having residents downtown, which I know has been a goal of the city, really helps, I think, with the stability overall in terms of having people on the street and actively using all these spaces. And then, of course, we're hoping that things like the Four Seasons will attract an entirely different type of customer and tourist from out of town.
Mega, very, very exciting as we look to the future. And thank you so much for being on today's. Thank you for being on
Thank you for the opportunity.
We're continuing the conversation about the future of downtown Jacksonville after this commercial break. I'm joined by the CEO of the Downtown Investment Authority next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville on Channel 4.
Welcome back. The development of Jacksonville's Northbank and the core of downtown has long been a priority for policymakers and the public. But what is happening now, and what is planned for the future? Will it ever happen in downtown Jacksonville? Joining us is lawyer, former City Council President, and CEO of the Downtown Investment Authority, Lori Boyer. Lori, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thrilled to have you here. Downtown is a big topic. I think the whole community's been sort of impatient and wondering about downtown. So first question is, when you look at the Northbank and you look at the core of downtown, what are the challenges that you're facing? And then I want to talk about what is going on.
Well, the core itself is a challenge to define, because from an internal standpoint, we want to include La Villa, we want to include the Cathedral area, the Elbow, all of that in the core. But I think most of the public thinks the core is somewhere 1 or 2 blocks on either side of Laura Street.
Okay.
And we did a little research the other day and discovered that 50% of the property between City Hall and the river and between Julia Street and Ocean, so that's going those 2 blocks on either side of Laura Street, are either government-occupied buildings or nonprofit owned. So only 50% of the property is privately owned and available for development or redevelopment, and that's where most of our corporate office buildings are. Not a lot of opportunity for new residential in those areas. We can certainly build retail in those areas and restaurants and create more vibrancy, but our residential population that we've been trying to grow in downtown and that's going to help support that retail has to grow in from the sides, including the sports and entertainment district that Mega was just speaking to.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. I think there's a sense of some, they go, hey, I don't know what's going on downtown, or there's nothing going on downtown, which is obviously false. How about highlighting some of the significant things that are going on and why it matters to a vibrant downtown?
So I'll highlight a couple. Thanks for the question. The first one is legislation that'll be before council in the next few weeks for a project called the Pearl Street District, which is, a portion of it is old First Baptist property that was sold and adjacent vacant lots. So this is north of City Hall, and it's an area that's pretty open, wide open, and undeveloped. There will be 1,000 residential units and 75,000 square feet of retail in that 4-block development.
Or isn't that the name of the game, really?
It is.
I mean, for this, if we're talking the future of downtown, that residential and that retail.
That scale, where you're building a neighborhood, is very catalytic. I saw a recent interview with Shad Khan. He was saying the same thing about what they hope to do in the sports and entertainment, where you're not just building a single development, but you're building a neighborhood. And there is an opportunity to do that. So that's an exciting project. We have many projects downtown under construction that will be delivering, not right in that central core, but building the population and bringing it in. So in La Villa, there's the for sale product that are the La Villa townhomes, right next to Lift Every Voice and Sing Park. We have residential that will deliver 300 units in Brooklyn on the former Times Union Publishing site, the One Riverside site. We've got the former YWCA Community Connections building that Vescor is restoring. That's a historic renovation. Just completed the old Federal Reserve building, and right around the corner on Hogan Street, right around the corner on Church Street, another historic renovation. Union Terminal Warehouse should deliver soon. That's in the sports entertainment area. That's the largest historic renovation project going on in the state. So there's some really significant historic projects that are happening, along with new construction projects that are happening.
You mentioned Brooklyn, and I think it sometimes gets overlooked or misunderstood. Why is that such a significant part of a future for a vibrant downtown?
So it is adjacent, obviously, and what we have seen and people speak to is the fact that downtown is a donut hole and it's growing from the outside in. But there's a reason for that, partly because there isn't available property for redevelopment in that core itself, but also because these adjacent areas that are perhaps easier to develop or have been more market friendly are now generating tax revenue that we're able to reinvest in downtown. So some of the projects like the two-way street conversion of Forsyth and Adams that's under construction has been on the books for 15 years, finally happening. That project is being funded because projects in Brooklyn happened. So there is a secondary impact. I know I'm as frustrated as the public is with the timing and delays and how long it takes to deliver the level of vibrancy that we want to see. But there's a lot of foundation that has been laid, and we've made a lot of progress in that direction. With just the units we have under construction, we'll be close to that 10,000 resident mark, and what we have in the pipeline is going to take us significantly higher than that. That's going to build that demand for retail space that we want to see.
So, Lori, you believe contrary to some, you believe there's a lot of forward momentum downtown.
I do. And that forward momentum is continuing. There's no question that as real estate markets have ups and downs, the momentum ebbs and flows. But what is really wonderful for Jacksonville downtown this time is to see it continuing through.
20 seconds. Do you believe Jacksonville will have that vibrant and lively downtown that everybody has wanted for so many decades?
Oh, absolutely. It's just a question of when, and I hope it's 5 years.
Lori, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you being with us. Kent Justice returns next week, and be sure to tune in then for This Week in Jacksonville. I'm Rick Mullaney, Executive Director of the Jacksonville University Public Policy Institute. Have a great week.
See why every day more people are choosing News 4 Jax, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.